All right. If John, if it's all right with you, we'll just get started. Is that all right?
Whenever you're ready.
Okay. Let me give you a little bit of an intro. Not that you need one, um, but there are a few more important witnesses to an American president's abuse of power than you, John Dean. As a former White House counsel to Richard Nixon, a younger Dean. Not that you've aged much. Um, your explosive testimony before the Senate Watergate Committee helped serve as a prelude to Nixon's ultimate resignation. 50 years later, your experience resonates still and in many ways. We're fortunate to have you with us today, beamed in from Southern California to discuss this new risk to American democracy and its prominent place on the 2024 ballot. A colleague of mine sent me a passage of your 2006 book, which I thought offered a prescient account of the changing face of your own Republican Party. And I quote, authoritarianism is not well understood and seldom discussed in the context of American government and politics, yet it now constitutes the prevailing thinking and behavior among some conservatives. I thought that was especially ironic as we explore what's happening in politics today. So with that, please welcome John Dean.
Thank you. In short, Kevin, I saw it coming. I also did another book in 2015 for the 2015 election called Authoritarian Nightmare, Trump and His Followers. I think this session will be most beneficial if I don't do all the talking, but rather we open this up for some dialogue as to what would be on the class's mind, their agendas, my thoughts about it, and any guidance or wisdom I might be able to share. I think I got to start at the outset, though. Uh, I'm here as a Watergate figure, and there is just no comparison between Watergate that happened 50 some years ago and what's happening today. They're just very, very different times. Richard Nixon and Donald Trump are quite dissimilar. Uh, I would say that as far as abusing the powers of an office, Trump is Nixon on stilts and steroids. Uh, the basic. I've looked at the personalities of the two men. I'm actually right now reading Lucky Loser by two New York Times reporters. It's a tome, but it's good. It's well done. It really looks at the Trump family's business affairs for the entirety of Donald's life and back into his father's life, and very very insightful. Nothing really has changed much when Donald Trump uh, grew into a businessman and evolved into a politician. It was ruthless in business. His father was not somebody who liked the rules, but was able to succeed by taking advantage of them and exploiting them. But anyway, to define Watergate and the current era as being similar is just doesn't work, and that's because of the personalities of the men involved. The book that Kevin mentioned was a book I did back during the Obama administration years when I saw authoritarianism growing in the Republican ranks. And so I decided to take a deep dive. It's a book called Conservatives Without Conscience. And that was the type of personality that was the most authoritarian. And what's interesting about authoritarianism is we've been studying it for a long time as a nation. We have had academics looking at authoritarian personalities really since the mid 40s, mid 1940s. In the aftermath of World War II, people were asking the question, could what happened in Germany and Italy happen in the United States? And the short answer was yes. That science was somewhat flawed initially. There are a lot of Freudian interpretations that wouldn't hold up to good empirical research, but it's been ongoing. So we know a lot about authoritarian personalities. And as journalists, I suggest you take a look at that personality. And if you can come to a conclusion other than the one I've come to, bless you, and it's encouraging. But I find that the real authoritarian personalities don't change. A few on the fringe will yet see the light and say this isn't good for democracy, and they will not pursue democratic government in their world. They'll go into business, they'll go into the military, they'll go into places where they can enjoy their authoritarianism. But the answer is that the way the government has succeeded so far is authoritarians have never been in control. Well, Donald Trump has unleashed that, and we have a certain tyranny of the minority right now that through our system, our electoral college system, has been able to elect a purely authoritarian president. Um, the Back to just finish up my comparison of Nixon and Trump while it's on my mind. The big difference is Donald Trump doesn't have a conscience. Richard Nixon had a conscience. That's why he resigned. He didn't want to put the nation through a trial that he might well have defended. As more evidence has come out over the years, we realize he actually did have some defenses and could have indeed may have survived an impeachment trial in the Senate. That's a big what if, but not an impossibility. Trump, we know, has survived two impeachment trials because the Republican Party was willing to give him whatever he wanted at that point. So that's the big difference, as I say, between the two men is Richard Nixon, well, he was an establishmentarian, he had a conscience, was concerned about what worked in government, he was motivated not by self-interest. I think his basic motivation to abuse power was he wanted to succeed. And what was his goal? World peace. He promised his mother he would do that, and I think that was his driving goal. He was ruthless in doing it, but the motive very different from Donald Trump's, which are typically self-serving. Let me. This session, as I understand it, is supposed to be on your journalism and democracy and covering it. And I must say that it has been very disappointing watching the coverage of Donald Trump, who is clearly, if you don't think he is a threat to democracy, even if you're a supporter, you're not very aware of the way the system works and the problems that we're facing. And I think some journalists are in that category. They think this is just another election. They think that this is not a particular test of the system, that Trump will settle in and not do anything untoward, notwithstanding his rhetoric on the campaign trail, notwithstanding the things that people who've worked for him say about him. And they just think everything will go along with a little different partisan twist. I think they're dead wrong. I think this is certainly the most important election of my lifetime. It's the only election I've ever been deeply concerned about the outcome. It is striking to me how close it is. The polling, I understand, is a very imprecise science, particularly with elections where people often don't even want to tell the pollsters what they're thinking. So we don't have a good gauge. There certainly is no clear indication at this stage, and we're counting days now, not weeks or months anymore. So it's bearing down on us. So with those opening thoughts, let me just say that to me, we could probably spend the entire session discussing what is democracy. I'm kind of focused on three things. One is that there are free and fair elections. Two, that in a republic like ours, that there is legitimate representation. And three, the rule of law exists. Yes, we could argue about how democratic all our institutions are or are not. And we can also discuss what's happening to them in the current climate, from not only the existing campaign, but to decisions of the Supreme Court, like Trump versus US, granting for the first time criminal immunity to a president, a sitting president, for any of his official acts. So, with those thoughts, it's your turn to ask me the questions.
Let me run to you and excuse my back.
Oh yeah, I'm really bad at this.
There we go.
Hello, Mr. Dean. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. My name is Mike Pasoli with the Associated Press. Thanks for taking time to talk to us today. Talking about authoritarianism, my question for you is journalists. There are so many supporters of Donald Trump. We have now been on our third election cycle of covering the former president. And he is nothing without his supporters, right? So when it comes to writing about him and especially his supporters, and I hear what you're saying about him as a candidate, as a threat, but how do you recommend to us to write about these things when half of the country seems to not have issue? And how do we do that fairly?
Well, fortunately, I don't think it is half the country. The polling is, I think, somewhat misrepresentative of what's really out there. I've done two books on authoritarianism. The second book, The Authoritarian Nightmare, I did that in collaboration with a man who has spent his entire professional career studying authoritarian personalities. Unfortunately, he recently passed away just when we most need him, a fellow by the name of Robert Altemeyer. And when Bob and I did the second book for the 2020 election to make sure it was out there, we went to Monmouth Polling Institute and actually tried to explore if they could test the population at large for authoritarianism. And after testing in several smaller samples, starting with New Jersey and then going national, we got really striking results that are now in the back of the paperback. And Monmouth Polling has continued to run those tests to see what percentage of the population is authoritarian, as a social scientist would define that personality. There are actually, just for purposes of discussion, there are really three kinds of authoritarian personalities. One group scientists have labeled social dominators. They're the people who jump out in front and say, "Follow me, I've got all the answers." There's a second group, which is the largest of the group, which they're labeled, as Altemeyer described me, for lack of imagination by social scientists, as right-wing authoritarian followers, which pretty much defines their politics and their disposition. And the third group are those who test high for both being social dominators and right-wing authoritarians. A very anomalous group and the most dangerous group, because they will do whatever they need to do to have that authority that they can grasp. Anyway, these are social dominators have not been the main focus for the last 4 decades, 5 decades now, but rather the followers have been. But there's increasing science on all of them. The reason I raised who they are is that the Monmouth polling found about a third of the voting population are authoritarian personalities. And that's enough to send somebody to the White House. Others who are not necessarily would be defined as authoritarian personalities tend to go along with authoritarian personalities. These are strong personalities typically. The religious right, it was the initial most prominent initial group of voting and very political authoritarians, and they have grown, and they are there are subcategories that we discuss in the book, but they are a large element. What influences them? Well, their leaders do. And they are inclined to do whatever their leader or the man or woman they have fallen in with tells them to do. They cannot be easily persuaded to change their views. They are very locked in. So, how do you report them? Well, the problem is nobody's been reporting about them. To my amazement, well, let me give you a personal example. I used to do a biweekly column I did it initially for a group called Fine Law, and then I was writing uh, for Justia, which is a legal publication online. And I discovered when Trump first came down the elevator, I didn't really know who Donald Trump was. I had never watched The Apprentice, but I noticed that listening to him, that he sounded an awful lot like an authoritarian personality that I had been studying for a number of years. And sure enough, then I read a PhD student is the first that went public and say, we have a classic authoritarian personality in Donald Trump. And that was followed up by some magazine pieces. And slowly it got out there that social science actually has been looking at these personalities. But the mainstream media did not want to cover this material. It has mystified me. It has mystified me more why fairly good sized group of social scientists who many of whom I know don't want to come out and talk about this. They just say we're just studying it. We don't want to become politically involved in it. Well, notwithstanding the fact their information has a lot to share. So one of the things, as I say, it has stunned me that journalism has never really dug into all this science to share what we know. And the long and short of how you deal with them is you have to outvote them. There are more non-authoritarian personalities in our population than there are authoritarian personalities. For decades, they were just outvoted and somewhat embarrassed to be who they were in the political sphere. if they if they if they get control of the government, uh, I think there'll be a lot more attention to them. But it'll be too late. Not a very satisfactory answer, but it's the way it is.
Hello, this is Diego from Bloomberg. You expressed your dissatisfaction at how the media has been covering Donald Trump. I think not surprisingly, we get hit from both sides, right? There's
Right.
also people that think we demonize Trump too much. And I think I wanted to ask for journalists that want to be balanced, fair and balanced, and not necessarily take sides. How do you like? What is your suggestion to covering Donald Trump?
I'll give you a very contemporary recent example I just happened to read in the last 48 hours. New York Times did a piece, one of our gateway publications, and they decided to compare the accuracy in public speaking and public campaigning and went back, I think, almost to the beginning of both of the campaigns. That obviously Harris very short, Trump very long, to compare how accurate they were in portraying what they were saying. And they sort of set these up side by side, that as if, we're going to be fair and equal. Well, as soon as you read the two pieces, you realized Harris isn't saying anything. Maybe some misstatements, maybe some exaggerations for political purposes, but not flat out lies. And then they filled the Trump article because that's all they could find, is that he is not a highly accurate campaigner in telling and reporting what he's doing. But they treated them equally. I think that's a total distortion. I think they should have said, we tried to do this and failed. We couldn't find there are comparisons between these two men, or man and a woman who are now running, and be honest with people. There isn't always an equal alternative. As you know, many of you know, I've been with CNN throughout the Trump years. I'm still there. My beat is primarily the legal travails of Donald Trump, because I understand that stuff and have been following it closely. And it has sort of he's been very effective in pushing it beyond and outside the election. They've done a remarkably good job of that, notwithstanding Judge Chutkan, who is making it clear that she's not going to be influenced by the election and is going to treat it like any other trial. But she's got a massive issue in front of her with the Supreme Court decision and sorting out what presidential immunity is. So how do you do it? I just think you call it the way it is. I'm not a Republican or Democrat. I've been independent here in California. We don't declare, and that gives us independence. I have voted for both Republicans and Democrats. But I'm telling the world, because it's true, Donald Trump, as a second-term president, is a threat to democracy. Clear. I mean, anybody who doesn't want to recognize it, and I think that you people in the media should be pounding that drum and making sure people understand what they're voting for. Now, maybe your editors won't let you. I don't know. I don't know how the collective workings of the media have so normalized Donald Trump that he is as able as he is to not be seen for the way I see him, which is, I think, in a real world view. But maybe, I wasn't particularly worried about him when he first got there, because I realized he doesn't understand how the system works. He doesn't know what he can and can't do. And he has surrounded himself with what appear to be sane people who will be something of a guardrail on him. That's all gone now. He's got people who know he's an empty vessel. They can pour anything they want to, and they can get accomplished what they want to accomplish. Read Heritage 2025 project, and you can get an idea of the sort of things they're dreaming of. That while he denies any connection with it, if it was popular, more popular even with his base, I'm sure he'd be out there promoting it. But that'll happen if he gets elected.
Now, just to follow up on that, and maybe this is a chicken and the egg question, but has the media normalized Donald Trump, or has the electorate normalized Donald Trump and the political establishment normalized Donald Trump? After all, he was impeached twice. He lost one election, yet people continue to vote for him. They continue to show support for him. And is the media not simply a reflection of that, or is it really that the media has normalized him?
My big comparison, obviously, is Watergate. Nixon was given no slack during Watergate. even by his own party, even by the conservative press of the era. They called it for what it was as it surfaced. Um, they could have, there were some. I think the number public support got down to around 28%, 27%. Depends on whose polling you look at. But he had lost his base, but they had also seen the evidence. Excuse me. They watched things like the Senate Watergate hearings, and people reached their own judgments. Uh, because of the polarized nature of the Congress, we've really had very little attention to Trump and what would otherwise be exploration of some of the behavior that has occurred under Trump. So the public isn't well educated. I think the media knows a lot that they don't report. Um, but I think it's your job to explain to people in as frank a terms as you can what's going to happen if this man gets elected. When I on CNN, I try to tell it like it is, what it means when the different rulings have come down, and they're not always, I'm sure pleasant for the Trump people to hear, but they know what they're doing. They know why they're delaying the way they are.
Go ahead, Valerie.
Hi, I'm Valerie from CQ Roll Call, and I wanted to ask a follow-up question on, I guess, looking out for the beginnings of authoritarian personalities. I, I'm curious particularly about your thoughts about JD Vance. Is he he's kind of seen as a rising star now, more Trump supporting Republicans are starting to latch onto him as well. And is he the makings of an authoritarian personality? Is he just a follower, or what should we be looking for there?
Yeah, the science that I have been digging through for the last couple decades doesn't know why people become authoritarian personalities. They find it a combination of nature and nurture. So somebody can have a disposition to become an authoritarian and not really become one. And then again, somebody can have that disposition and there are opportunities that make it very comfortable to fulfill their disposition. So we don't know the answer. J.D. Vance, um, I was talking to somebody not long ago who was involved in both. He wasn't J.D. Vance at the time. He was other and his later wife when they were admitted to Yale, and how much they have evolved since that admission. And we can see that there it looks like the nurture process has pulled J.D. Vance with the opportunities to the right, where wealthy conservative friends funding projects and campaigns has brought him over, and he's a very bright guy. So he knows how to dig and delve and come up with thoughts that are appealing to other authoritarians. So I think he's a pretty fully flushed out authoritarian personality right now, and that looks like the core. In fact, that's what's happened slowly to the entirety of the base of the Republican Party. I have lots of Republican friends who are not authoritarians, but they like the tax policies of the Republicans. And they say we're just going to hold our nose and vote again. Um, it's and these are people who typically do not think about the consequences of the entire federal structure becoming authoritarian. That's been quite remarkable to me. Uh, I have been reading for years the law journal articles about the unitary executive theory, which has now been capped off with presidential immunity, which is just an extension of the Federalist Society developing all these ideas and trying to connect them back to the founding, which they don't connect well, but yet developing academic journals and what have you. And this is the ultimate prize is to have uh, a figure who is in essence a king. This is the top of the unitary executive theory, where that president can indeed uh, do criminal acts. You can't even now inquire into them. Um, and if you have somebody who has a disposition to say they want the gold in Fort Knox because it makes good toilets, they could send the trucks down as a core official. It's not very hard for a president to define what is a core executive function and to create some basis to do that function, which nobody else can investigate at this point. It is the injection of immunity into the presidency, criminal immunity, has forever changed that, unless we go back and make them uh, like everybody else and subject to criminal exposure. Somehow we made it, what, 245, almost 250 years as a government without that immunity disrupting the power of the presidents evolving very solidly. But yet, Chief Justice Roberts is terribly worried about presidents now not having that kind of protection, and they're just going to wilt away in his vision.
Hi, I'm Sarah Fortinsky with The Hill. I'm curious a little bit more about your media criticism. If you look at the data, it shows that people are basically split on whether or not they think Kamala Harris or Donald Trump is a threat to democracy. I think it's like 48-47 in the last poll that I saw. And it's my understanding that at least some members of the media, my question is, do you give any credence to the argument that in order to have a sustainable democracy, you need to have media that the public trusts? And if you report, if you, as you suggest, sound the alarm about what you describe as this like existential authoritarian threat that Donald Trump poses, does that risk further alienating part of the population and then having no source of public trust?
Well, as you know, one of the targets of authoritarians when they do get power is to indeed eliminate the media and criticism. So you guys are be the first to go, or very early in the undertaking to do so. Uh, Trump has already shown his disposition towards unfavorable media coverage, and it's very difficult to survive in that atmosphere. On a personal level, the second book I did, Authoritarian Nightmare. One of the reasons it came out so late is, without mentioning what publishing house, I've had a lot of, I'm working on my 14th book, and I have good relationships with all my editors, some who've done multiple books for me, and I've had great success with those books as far as sales. The Authoritarian Nightmare book that I decided needed to be done with Bob Aldermeyer, because he has this world of knowledge about these personalities. And he, when I did the book during the Obama years that Kevin cited, Conservatives Without Conscience, nobody was paying any attention at that point to authoritarianism at all. It wasn't on anyone's horizon. And I got a lot of interesting feedback as a result of that. But what I learned is that publishers, when Trump arrived, became afraid to publish this kind of material. They really, the big houses, they're politically sensitive, and so my editor said, my I won't mention which book, but the one I actually talked to a couple editors, but the one was one of my favorite editors said to me, John, don't try to run this through our house because they're going to ultimately turn it down. I can just tell you the temper here. So that I didn't. I went to ended up going to I called an old friend who is a former publisher of a very successful house, and he told me, I said, would you do a book? He said, no, I'm out of the business, but I'll tell you where somebody who will do this book. And it was Melville House, small house, and did a great job with the book. So, and it was, they say we don't care. We're prepared to take on presidents who have gone astray. So anyway, that I've had it as I think it's going to get worse if Trump gets elected, and I think the news media, you will find your editors pulling back from stories. You probably would be curtailed right now before the election, doing stories that lay out what could happen if we have an authoritarian president who wants to be a dictator on day one. Uh, so it's late in the game right now.
Can I just follow up on that?
Yeah, go ahead.
So do you think that it's useless for journalists to try to appear as, down the road, or at least equally fair to both sides as possible, in an effort to get more of the public to trust them, and therefore, long-term preserve democracy by, keeping faith in the media?
Yeah, I think the media should always be fair to both sides, but I think they should also explain, have some insight into what it means and what they're reporting. Uh, for most people, they don't even tune in politics and government until very late in the election. I have three granddaughters. I worry about their future. One of them is very politically sophisticated. The youngest is couldn't care less about politics, and the oldest, they're all three still in college. The oldest, uh, she's worried about becoming too political uh, because she doesn't know how it could affect her future. She's getting a PhD in mathematics and is a little concerned about authoritarian politics.
Hi, John. This is Akela from Bloomberg. I wanted to ask if you thought that if President Richard Nixon was in power today under the current political environment of the Republican Party, do you think he would have survived the Watergate scandals and perhaps not resigned?
He couldn't have been charged even today under the U.S. versus Trump, or Trump versus the U.S., excuse me, the Supreme Court immunity decision. Uh, he would walk. He would not have criminal liability. Virtually for example, let's just take one example: the smoking gun tape, where Nixon is overheard 6 days after the arrest at the Watergate, telling his chief of staff, and this tape doesn't come out until some 2 years after the event. but he's telling his chief of staff, Bob Haldeman, to call the CIA in and have them direct the FBI to halt their investigation of what was then Nixon donors. That was seen, first of all, the reason it was called the smoking gun tape is Nixon had denied any involvement in the cover-up whatsoever. Here he was 6 days after the arrest, clearly giving directions for cover-up. But under the immunity decision, only a president could give those orders. Those are core functions. You couldn't even get the evidence of the conversations relating to that. That tape would be suppressed today under the immunity decision. And only a president has the authority to tell the CIA what to do. Today, the structure is a little different. You have DNI, the Director of National Intelligence, is the intermediary. Not that a president can't pick up the phone and talk to anybody in the executive branch. But as I say, if you go through the key crimes that Nixon was likely to be charged with, there are ways to cast all of them as core official functions. His promise of, his conversation with his special counsel Chuck Colson to dangle a pardon in front of Howard Hunt so he wouldn't talk. That's a core function, pardon power. So anyways, if you go, I haven't done that yet. I plan to do it at some point. But just off the top, there is not any criminality anymore because the president is immune. Which leaves another interesting question of how about his staff that carried out when Nixon famously or infamously told the reporter, David Frost, in the Frost-Nixon interviews, that if the president does it, that means it's not illegal. Which is often quoted, what is not quoted is his next statement. And he said, if his staff didn't have that kind of protection, they wouldn't be able to carry out any of his orders. Well, the Supreme Court didn't address that. So the question is going to be addressed soon is how many of Trump's staff is also immune as a result of following up on his orders.
I guess, do you see any dotted lines between Donald Trump and Richard Nixon at all?
Any dotted line? Certainly, there is a, as I say, notwithstanding being very different personalities, and notwithstanding the fact that Trump was actually met and had conversations and correspondence with Richard Nixon, and they have a mutual friend in Roger Stone. There are abuses of power that I understand Trump doesn't think were abusive on Nixon's behalf, but yet they were seen as outrageous at the time, where he would go beyond the scope of what had been traditional presidential behavior. So yes, there are very different men, and it was rare with Nixon, and it's daily conduct with Donald Trump.
Back here, Jesus.
Hi, Mr. Dean. I'm Jesus Rodriguez with the Washington Post. Thank you for doing this. I have two questions. One is, have you ever been able to successfully convince a Trump supporter that Trump is at least worse than Nixon or more dangerous than Nixon? And number two is sort of more of a fun one. Do you ever talk to your sort of contemporaries from that era who worked either with, for Nixon, or in politics in that era and talk about politics today?
Absolutely. The person I talk to most is Alex Butterfield, who, as those of you who are history buffs would know, he is the one who both installed the Nixon taping system at the request of Chief Staff Bob Haldeman, and then held the secret until he was asked by the Senate Watergate Committee as a result of my testimony, where I said I thought I had been recorded in one or more conversations because of his behavior. And Butterfield answered, yes, indeed, that's very likely he was recorded. And of course, the rest is history. But Alex is 97, and he's living in San Diego. He's about a year ago, got remarried. He's in good health. He is in good mind, and pretty surprised at what's happening. In fact, stunned at times. And there are many people from that era that I know, that I talk to, and they are. It's head shaking, because it is just so far beyond what happened back then to what is going on in the world of politics and government today. The Heritage Plan, the 2025 plan, probably would have gotten everybody arrested back in the Nixon era, or they would have all been considered co-conspirators in an effort to overthrow the government. But so times have changed, and I do talk to those people, and we have varying degrees of understanding of why it's happened. But it's clear that in my estimation, the Republicans, as they became more focused on the presidency and this unitary executive theory, realized that their most likely route to power was through the executive branch. So focusing on winning the presidency became much more important and more easy to accomplish. Although with the country becoming increasingly polarized and working on a lot of redistricting that is not in the tradition of one man, one vote. They have also had success with the House, and the Senate, of course, is state by state. But they have done well there too.
Sorry, my first question was: have you ever successfully convinced a Trump supporter?
Oh, yes.
That that he's more dangerous than Nixon or an authoritarian or what have you?
I have some attorney friends who are solid Trump supporters, and one in particular with whom I talk frequently or exchange text. And he is, as all practicing attorneys has taken an oath to support and defend the Constitution. I think every state except one requires that to be a member of the bar. And the one has a substitute that is just the same in practice. Anyway, my friend Michael and I go back and forth, and he acknowledges to me on an intellectual level that Trump is a terrible president and a disaster, but he's going to vote for him because he likes the kind of people he'll stock into his administration. Michael is a pure authoritarian as well. I mean, he's a salute, click his heels, and yes, sir, what can I do for you? A good lawyer, but he's a believer, and we've had, I've gotten him to the point where when we talk about certain activities, for example, we had long conversations about calling the president of Ukraine, President Zelensky, to have him investigate Joe Biden to see if they could stir up a scandal. He says, I know that's not what a president should be doing, and trying to leverage foreign aid to get another country to drum up an investigation. But he says it didn't happen, so it's okay. And we have these arguments constantly. So what I've gotten out of him, and what a lot of people that I have talked to and read, is they acknowledge the behavior and that it's not the way they would prefer it, but they, for one reason or another, they like Donald Trump and they're going to stay with him. So the answer is I have convinced none of my authoritarian friends, some of whom you would recognize by name, to vote otherwise or come out against Trump, even though they privately admit he's not a good president. He's not good for the country, and they worry. But peer pressure, I think, is one of the facts that they don't. It's complex with each individual.
Gabby, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Gabby. I'm with the Nevada Independent. My question is, a lot of the sort of narrative about Watergate, people often talk about, Nixon losing Senate Republicans. That was sort of, in some ways, the straw that broke the camel's back or what have you. I'm sure some of it has to do with like party realignment, but between that era and this one, what do you see as having changed that, pretty much no one in Congress, whether it was the multiple impeachments or anything, has decided, and there are opportunities for McConnell and Kevin McCarthy and what have you to sort of turn the page, but never did so.
Let me. This is a great point, since you all are journalists, to clarify. There is a journalistic myth that Senator Barry Goldwater, Minority Leader Hugh Scott, and House Minority Leader John Rhodes went down to Nixon to tell him it was time to leave in the fall of '74, shortly before he resigned. I've heard it over the years and what have you. Well, I knew Senator Goldwater from the time I was about 13 years of age. His son, Barry Jr., and I were roommates in prep school. We've been friends for life. He introduced me to my wife when he's over here in California. He used to live here in California because he represented a district that borders my congressional district in the San Fernando Valley for 18 years. So I used to see him regularly. We still talk regularly or exchange mail regularly. But anyway, so I've known the senator, and I asked him about that episode. And in fact, Barry and I did a book called Pure Goldwater, where we took a lot of his stuff that I found in his archive and and published it because it was pure gold, or it was him rather than a ghostwriter or an editor, and it made for a very interesting book. And one of the stories, I think we put it in the book, but one of the stories I got straight was he told me when he went down to the White House with Hugh Scott and John Rhodes, that they didn't know quite what they were doing. They had taken an accurate Senate count, and he was going to lose in the Senate if it ever got that far. And this was the time where Nixon had not announced whether he was going to resign or what he was going to do. So it got interpreted that they went down and pushed him over the ledge or convinced him to go. The senator told me, he said, when we got down to the White House, Al Haig was the chief of staff at that time. And he said, Al Haig rushed us into his office, the chief of staff office. And he said to us, for God's sake, don't suggest that he resign. He said, Haig reported, I think he's like 95% of the way there. He's getting ready to tell the family he's going to leave. And I'm afraid if you tell him he should go, he'll just do the opposite. It'll reverse everything that is thinking this thing through. So don't do that and just answer his questions. And that's when the senator said, told me later, he said, when I went in the Oval Office, he said, and Nixon was in the best mood I'd seen him in a long, long time. He said, he's like a guy who had just gotten a hole in one and was prepared to buy rounds for everybody in the clubhouse. He said he was just in the nicest mood. And he said, we didn't tell him. We answered how we would vote, including me telling him I was going to vote him against him. But it was not the session that it has been portrayed where these were designees of the Republican Party to go down and tell the president it was over. So that is a pure myth.
If I could just follow up,
Sure.
I mean, if he was going to lose in the Senate, I mean, what was it with Trump? It was like what, 10 Republicans in the House and 5 in the Senate or something who voted for, to move the impeachment, and half of them are gone now. I guess just like what do you think has changed in terms of Republicans in office willing to sort of call out this behavior or willing to hold their president accountable?
As I alluded to earlier, Nixon did have defenses. Nixon could have put on a defense. Nixon never had a good lawyer, a criminal lawyer, who could have helped him out until after he resigned. And then he hired Jack Miller, who indeed helped Leon Jaworski realize he couldn't get a fair trial. And that information got back to Ford, and I think was a part of the reason that Ford was inclined to do the pardon as well. Repeat your question again, the key point on it.
Sure. I guess whether it's party realignment or different incentives, what do you think has changed within the party among elected officials such that there's no longer any, critical mass or really very few people at all, Republicans in Congress, who would ever stand up to Trump or took the chance to?
The book I did called Conservatives Without Conscience that Kevin cited, the 2006 book, that initially was a book I was going to do with Senator Goldwater. And it was because he got into a public dispute with Jerry Falwell. And they were exchanging some pretty harsh words publicly. I think the last word Goldwater got in when he said what Falwell needs is a good kick in the ass, and then he might get straightened away. Goldwater was very worried about the as he called it, the preachers influencing politics. And because of their authoritarianism, he said, John, he said, if they take over the Republican Party as they seem to want to do, he said, we're not going to ever get anything done because these people believe they're operating on the word of God and they can't compromise that. And he said, politics won't work if you can't compromise. And he said, I'd like to figure out what's going on. How bad is this? And so we started on a book that Barry Jr. called me and said, Dad really wants to do this book, but I think it could affect his health and he's not in the best of shape right now. Why don't you just slow it down a little bit or put it on the shelf for a while and come back and do it? Well, the senator never felt better, and he soon died. And so I just put that book on the shelf. But I had just started looking at this social science that studies authoritarians, and particularly the religious part of it. We're studying the personalities of those people. And so that's where I started this whole thing and realized how I recognized all these personalities had been my co-workers at the Nixon White House who would literally click their heels, salute, and go do whatever they were told to do without ever raising questions, which was not my disposition when I thought something was astray. So anyway, I think that because of the real dominance in the Republican base of authoritarian personalities, that there is no room for compromise anymore, and they won't do it. And they would be very inclined, if it was a Democrat, to go down and tell them to resign if they had the votes. But I think that's and you know if I can see that changing because they're about one third of the party. They are there are these inflexible authoritarian personalities, and if they lose, they'll go back to where eventually they were, which is not trying to call all the shots from their minority position. They'll realize that it doesn't work. It isn't good government. Tyranny of the minority is not smart politics in a democracy, and that will change things. But it's going to take time, and but it is one of the cores of the problem.
Okay, I think we have time for one more. That's good for you. Or try two more. Two is all right, John?
Sure.
Hi, this is Valerie from CQ Roll Call again. I wanted to ask you about your comments on Project 2025 and how that connects with media coverage, because I think that is an area that has seen a lot of media coverage and criticism. And it did ring some alarm bells, so much so that we saw the Harris campaign in the debates identify that as a weak point, and ultimately, led to Trump saying, "I have nothing to do with that. I'm not associated with that." And so I guess I have 2 points/questions out of that. One is, was the media doing their job on reporting on Donald Trump by reporting on Project 2025? Was that coverage, kind of what you were looking for? And two, I guess, what does it say about how authoritarianism or how an authoritarian power forms, that if you actually show people the policies that they're voting for, the candidate has to step back and say, whoa, I'm not associated with that, even though it's kind of, they're still tied up with it. I don't know if I worded that really greatly, but
First of all, I think I had actually discovered Project 2025 long before the media was even discussing it. They posted it very early, and there were a lot of rumblings about it, and in occasional references to it. When I first opened it up, it's 900 plus documents, and I was going to print it out. And I said, God Almighty, that'll take a couple reams of paper. So I've only printed out select sections like the Department of Justice and what have you, and really taken a dive into them. But so there are lots of areas that I only know from the press coverage, which later did follow. So I think once it became an issue of discussion, the media did a good job. That was probably heightened by the Democrats making it a campaign issue, and Trump running from it and wanting to know what he was running from. I'm sure he's never seen the document, or maybe he's seen the document, but not taken a run into it. It's a remarkable document, and it isn't how I, in every instance, envisioned authoritarians would want to implement their authoritarian instincts. But the slash and burn part of it is probably some of the most disturbing, where they're just going to, close down NOAA, and so we wouldn't be able to get these weather reports on storms. I mean, just silly stuff that really wasn't clear to me why, what was even behind it. The Department of Justice material is a whole other program. It is stunning. It is not how, in the tradition of the department, notwithstanding their opening words as to the functions of the department, they quickly slide into areas that would really cause a national nightmare. So anyway, I think the press gets praise for bringing that up, constantly reminding people of what's in it. It's never been done in a very digestible form, and it's a little wonky to want to do that. And I suspect that was part of the design of the project, was spell it out in detail, because it's a handbook, it's a blueprint for what it's the kind of document a transition would create for implementation. And you're right, as I say, I don't think the Heritage Foundation ever thought it would become the issue it has become, but it is one way authoritarians who wrote these things, these different sections, envision that they could implement what is in essence authoritarian policy. I think we should all hope that doesn't happen, and that I can't imagine how you would ever get 3% of it through Congress, particularly as dysfunctional as Congress is right now. But they don't think that's necessary. They is my understanding, they have written reams of executive orders that if Donald Trump is elected on day one, he will have a signing ceremony and just sign one executive order after another. And I guess we'll sort them all out in court, is where we'll figure out what they mean and how they go.
On a lighter note, I wanted to ask, there's been a lot of shows and movies about the Nixon White House and Watergate. You've been played by several actors in them. Have you watched any of these? Is there any, I would say, other than All President's Men, that you highly recommend and think is particularly accurate?
You know why I like All the President's Men? I saw a director's copy final screening with the director, Alan Coppola. That's his name, yeah. And I went up to after the movie, small crowd, maybe 20 people were there. And I went up and thanked him. He said, "What are you thanking me for?" I said, "Because I'm not in the movie." He said, "What do you mean you're not in the movie?" I said, "I'm not in that movie anywhere. Even that ticker that goes along at the end and gets everybody that they have missed, and has something on the one of the wire services ticker reporting this, that, and the other thing." He said, "We missed you?" I said, "Totally." And he said, "Well, I'll take your thanks." And he said, it's too late to change now. But he said, "I can't imagine telling the story without telling something about you." So that's why I like that movie. But have I watched any of the others? No, not really. My granddaughters, my son typically is aware of something coming on, and he will tell. They all know enough of the real world, what I did and didn't do, to know that this is pretty much fantasy. Some of it defamatory, but I gave up long ago. Only once have I filed a defamatory action, and that was against a book called Silent Coup that drew my wife into the story, who had nothing to do with all this. And that took 10 years, but in the end, the deans were allowed to say we were satisfied with the settlement. And we were satisfied with the settlement. but it was a decade in the doing, and I did more law in that decade than I had done before or after. There were 17 lawyers on the other side at one point, and I had two. So we cranked out we kept a lot of lawyers dancing for a long time. But I have not, I'm sometimes aware of projects. And this is a small town. If somebody will send me a script, and if I decide to look at it, and there were a couple that I said this is outrageous, and I don't want to litigate, defamation lawsuits are nightmares. But I will try in varying degrees of. There was a movie called Felt, Felt, which was about Woodward's uh, deep throat source. And I've never seen the movie. I've had friends that have seen it, but I did get the script, and it had so tortured my relationship with Mark Felt and Mark Felt's knowledge of what I was and wasn't doing that it had me lying, it had me doing all kinds of devious things I'd never done, and what have you. I corrected I made a fairly lengthy memo and got it to the producer. They said, "Oh, wait, well, the director who I knew wouldn't talk to me." That was the first sign that there were some problems. Anyway, to make a long story short, all the sections I had objections to ended up cut out of the movie, just gone. They were shot and done, and ended up on the cutting room floor. I can only believe that the producers, who are honorable people and a really good shop, wanted to get the story straight rather than defame anybody. But most of them are pure fiction. I did a senior thesis as an undergraduate called Verisimilitude in the Political Novel, and I took the novel Advice and Consent and pulled it apart to see how accurate it was, and it was dead on as far as process and procedures and what have you, done by a very long time Senate reporter, Alan Drury. And there was high verisimilitude in that. So I've had verisimilitude on my mind about political novels and movies for a long time. And sadly, I must report that it is 95% fiction that comes out of this coast anyway, in portraying these events.
Well, I'm going to have to unfortunately end it there. This has been a fascinating discussion, daunting at times, but also entertaining, I hope. And I think we've learned a lot, but I want to thank you for your time.
Well, thank you all for listening to me, and good luck to you all. And may we not have to wrestle with authoritarianism after November this year. Wrestle in a deadly way with it.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.